Most businesses only focus on growing and expanding, and they give little to no attention to their exit strategies until after exit is staring them in the face. Learn here at Boosting Business Value, brought to you by Blue Sky Business Resources. You'll discover how to shape a more durable and saleable business, and how to implement a powerful, well-planned, and rewarding exit. Join Dr. David Gruder and Jason Tuzinkewich as they deliver actionable tips for lower middle market company owners, executives, and their trusted advisors. Find out where your business currently stands, how you can meet your revenue objectives more reliably, and how to grow your venture to the next level, all with a smooth and fruitful exit in mind. Here are your hosts, Dr. David and Jason.
Welcome. I'm Dr. David Gruder, the business life cycle, exit planning, and post-acquisition psychologist for Blue Sky Business Resources. And with me is co-host Jason Tuzinkewich, Blue Sky's Chief Operations Officer. And in this episode, we're going to explore what to consider when selecting your best business exit option.
Thank you, Doctor. And I'm really excited to be talking about this subject. I think it's a really great place for people to start when they're thinking about their business as a retirement plan and as, preparing themselves for the next stage of life. And to kick things off, I really kind of wanted to get into some of the scary statistics. First and foremost, the Exit Planning Institute runs a study annually. And consistently, they find out that 83 to 90% of business owners have no exit plan whatsoever. And this becomes truly catastrophic if they fall into one of what we call the 5 Ds. Now, if you play dodgeball, you might be thinking dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge. But in business, we're talking about death, divorce, disability, disaster, or disagreement between partners. Any of those things could dramatically change the landscape of business ownership for you and your family. And so this is why we want to make sure that people start to consider a plan early on. And in that plan, we want to talk about, when do you know that it's time to actually sell? And how do you deal with risk and negotiation? And how can you today start setting yourself up for mitigating risk and positioning strong negotiational position early on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those stats are incredibly frightening to me. 83 to 90% of lower middle market business owners don't have an exit plan. And what you've just described around the 5 Ds are, I'm sure our listeners can really relate to those easily because they're common sense once they're pointed out. And then another scary stat is that only 4% of lower middle market business owners have a formal life after ownership plan. And that means 96% of business owners don't have a formal life after ownership plan. Now, the good news in all of that is that if you're among the 96%, then you've got a lot of company.
You're not alone.
No, indeed not. And developing that kind of plan beforehand is something that provides you with huge advantages. And we want to unpack those advantages. The first of those is that when you have a life after ownership plan that's yours, that you've developed and really embrace and look forward to, it's your insurance policy against seller's remorse after you've succeeded at exiting. Because the reason that's so important is because the prospect of seller's remorse undermines business owners' abilities to follow through with their exit plan. And Jason, I know you've seen plenty of situations, and I've seen some myself, where an owner says, yes, I'm ready to exit. And let's say it's a merger and acquisition situation where they're going to sell their business, where a buyer is found who's really a legitimate buyer and is prepared to buy at the price or even above the price that the owner wants to sell for. And then the owner undermines or sabotages the sale at the last minute. And oftentimes that undermining or sabotaging is connected to their terror over what their life is going to be after they're no longer the owner.
Yeah, I'm going to hit you with another scary stat here.
Yeah.
97% of lower middle market M&A transactions that fail to close are destroyed by the seller not being able to let go at the last minute.
Yep, there we go. I mean, that 97% is very much in line with the 96% stat.
Exactly.
So, we're not making up these statistics. The information is there and it's known widely in the M&A world. The problem is that even though it's known, inadequate steps, if any, are taken to prevent these avoidable upheavals from occurring. So another advantage of developing a life after ownership plan is that in resolving family or partner issues ahead of time, you've removed crucial block that can prevent your exit plan from succeeding.
Let's not forget that, these are scary conversations. We're talking about, a business owner thinking about what he's going to do when he or she is no longer a business owner. We're talking about the eventualities of, old age and death and disability, things that we don't want to deal with. And so, don't beat yourself up for not having these conversations. If you're part of the 96%, this is a hard thing to get going. And that's why we like having the doctor on the couch with us.
Well, thank you. And the point of that is that these things that we're unpacking with you, these things that can undermine success with an exit, are avoidable with the right facilitation, the right planning, the right assistance. These things can get resolved, can get addressed before they have an opportunity to create problems. And so a third reason or advantage for having a life after ownership plan is that preparing beforehand to embrace your post-exit lifestyle change can do the same thing that preventing seller's remorse can do, which is that it can get the owner excited about their next chapter. It gives them the clarity that they're seeking in order to have the internal permission to move forward with exiting. And connected with that is one of the biggest things that Jason and I have both seen in owners who get wet feet, who get stage fright, if you will, around exiting, which is that so many owners, especially owners of lower middle market businesses, they've put so many years of blood, sweat, toil, persistence, devotion, and oftentimes sacrifice into building their business to the point where it can be sold, that they have inadvertently built their sense of self around the business. And what that means is that when they consider the possibility of exit, no matter how strongly part of them wants to follow through on exiting, they're terrified that they won't know who they are after they are free of this business that has been their baby, has been their child, that has been the child that they've nurtured and grown up into sellability or their exitability, no matter what the exit plan happens to be. And so ahead of time, expanding your sense of self beyond over-identifying with your business is what makes it possible to more easily and happily let go whenever the time does come to activate your chosen exit plan.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful stage setting, Doctor, for the rest of the conversation. I really appreciate that. And, we can't state enough just how hard it is, even for ourselves as business owners. I talked to my financial advisor a few weeks back and he asked me when do you want to retire? What age? And I'm like, do I have to? I can relate to the idea of, not wanting to let go and feeling like, this is what keeps me young. But there's a family outside of work. There are hobbies outside of work. And yes, you can only golf so many times in a week. before it starts becoming mundane. But there's life outside of work. And the earlier you start to explore what that means for you, the easier it will be to make that transition. But there are a couple of things that business owners don't realize about the transitional process as well that I want to make sure that we get out right in front of. And that's, first and foremost, how long a transaction takes. I can tell you that I meet a lot of business owners that wait until they're burnt out, they're tired, they can't bring themselves to be excited about work anymore, and they just want out. Well, selling a business and getting the appropriate value and legacy protection for the business, that takes time. The average M&A transaction takes between 9 and 18 months. I've had some that took longer because we had to find the right buyer to take over the business and run it in an appropriate way. I've had a couple run shorter, but that 9 to 18 months is pretty standard. So, when you're looking at this is something you really need to get out in front of and start way earlier than you think that you want to leave. You're also likely going to have an extra year on the backside of transitioning out and transitioning the new owners in. So 9 to 18 months to close a transaction, another 12 to 24 months of transition period. You're looking at a long-term investment to exit. And then, most business owners kind of feel like this is one of those things like selling a house. It's obviously more valuable real estate than a house, but it's the same thing. You list it, people show up, and you get to choose the offer that you like the best. A good business exit is more of an active process. You identify who good buyers are. You determine what the business needs to get to that next level without you guiding the ship. And then you find good representation to actively seek out the best fit for the next stage of the business, as well as, giving you the peace of mind to leave knowing that it's in good hands.
Well said, really well said. And it ties into the blocks that prevent owners from participating in the selling process beyond what we were covering before, because what we touched on earlier was, of course, how many business owners kill business deals because they don't fully realize they're not ready to let go of the business. But in terms of participating in the selling process itself, most business owners really don't end up selling to the highest bidder. And sometimes that decision is values-based because the highest bidder is not necessarily the best fit. But also, selling is an emotional process. We are not Mr. Spock. We're not Vulcans, to draw on a Star Trek analogy, where we are not, as human beings, 100% logical. We're also emotional. And if we care, as most lower middle market business owners do, about our personnel, the people who will continue to work for our business once we've sold it, we want a buyer who's not only going to buy for the price that we want to sell the business for and that we have worked to ensure that the business can be sold for. We also want a new owner who is going to cherish, care for, retain the personnel that we've nourished and developed into being highly valuable to the business, those personnel who want to stay with the business after acquisition. So we need to be prepared for how we're going to deal with the emotions and values-based decisions that are part of successfully participating in the selling process itself.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you brought back that emotional component, because it's such a big deal. You don't think about it until you're in it, but this is the single largest financial transaction of most business owners' lives. It is, again, the emotional stepping away from a huge part of your own identification of yourself, and you're worried about, is that financial transaction going to be enough to provide for my family and my future the way that I want to? Did all of that blood, sweat, and tears pay the right kind of dividend at the end of the day? There's a lot to unpack there. And the more that you have a structured, detailed plan that you walk through and that you've really had time to marinate on, the easier it is to let go of some of that emotional baggage and focus on, the logical side of things. So yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up again.
And I'm so glad you added to that all of the things you just said, because that rounds out the picture.
Yeah, it's a big picture. And so this is why we want to excite people to start the hard conversations, to start the plan, to get out ahead of this, 5-10 years. You could say there is not an exit on my horizon, but let's start planning just in case, because every business owner exits their business, whether it's standing up or laying down. We like the standing up side. We like the jumping around side and having fun. So, one of the things that got me into M&A transaction advisory is that I started and exited 2 businesses of my own, and I did a horrible job. I didn't know what my options were. I didn't have a plan. I got tired of one project, and so I sold it, started another project, and then I had a family emergency, and I had to leave my business preemptively. And, after I was done with those 2 businesses, I was looking back and saying, I don't have the right, equity and capital to show for all this work. What was it for? And then I learned about M&A, and I started learning that there are options. And so now I'm a super evangelist for making sure that people know there are options, because I'm like, this could have changed my whole life when I was younger. And so what are those options? There's people think that they exit their business, they're either going to shut the doors and sell all the assets, which is an option, usually not the best option. All the employees have to go away then and find new jobs, and you're not going to get the highest dollar for your business in most cases, but it is an option. Or they're going to sell it to, a buyer, probably a competitor. Another option. And sometimes that is the best option, selling to a competitor or somebody up or down the vertical value stream. That's an option. But there are other options too. You could do an internal transition. There still are, believe it or not, business owners who pass the business on to their children. It does happen. It's becoming increasingly rare, but legacy businesses still exist. And you want to be able to do that in a way that's equitable for you and your family member. You could transition to the management team. Maybe you have a great management team that is young, enthusiastic, and has a vision for taking the business forward. You could do that. And then there's this program that I'm in love with recently. It's called the Employee Stock Ownership Program, or ESOP. And the reason that I'm in love with it, it's kind of the best of a lot of different worlds. It's a federally qualified retirement program, which means that there's a trust that's set up that buys the business. And then it allocates stock from that business to the employees. The employees become owners, but they don't have the tax event that just giving employees stock options brings up. The ESOP has a clause in it that requires the trust to buy the shares back as people exit the business. And so there's liquidity in that stock, and the business gets a tax break for being owned by an ESOP trust. And the employee never has a taxable event until they actually use the money. So everybody wins from a tax perspective in an ESOP. That's a neat, relatively new, but gaining traction vehicle to exit a business with an internal transaction where your staff ends up taking over the business. And then there are external transactions. And that is finding the strategic buyer, somebody up or down the vertical chain, or a direct competitor. They can see value by cutting out your SG&A. Maybe you have some secret sauce. I'm working with a company right now that is a wholesaler. They've got extraordinary purchasing power. They're 30% better margin than the industry peers. Somebody is going to want to, one of their competitors is likely going to want to buy them, wipe out all the SG&A and the bottom line thing, but take that margin, that buying power, and tuck it into their business as a way to grow the bottom line without necessarily having a huge impact in revenue growth. So there's that. There's private equity, and private equity has in many circles a bad reputation, especially after the 80s when private equity was all about hacking and slashing staff. Now, I'm very excited to say that now labor is at such a premium that there are more private equity firms buying for staff than buying for the business. So we turned around in that way. There are some really good players in private equity. There are also some very shady players in private equity. It's something that, it could be a great option, but it's not always. Then you've got the IPO, going public, as some people call it. That gives everybody a bunch of liquidity it is a deeply arduous process, a ton of paperwork, a ton of compliance, a ton of reporting. If you are in that $1 billion range, this might make sense. But for smaller companies, it's usually not an option because the cost and the resource allocation to go public is just drowns out all the value that could be derived from it.
And if I can just add one other thing about IPO, I've seen companies opt to do an IPO, and in the process of becoming publicly owned, the very culture, values, and mission that catapulted the business into profitable success get undermined by the shareholders in a publicly owned company who are generally primarily motivated by increase in profits and ignoring the other factors. They're willing to sacrifice the other things that made the company succeed. So I've seen some companies opt for IPO that really, because of their mission and their values, would have actually been better served by remaining privately held.
That's a really big point. You have to realize that in any of these external transactions, the business is getting a new master. And when you think about the internal culture and the vision and what it's going to take to drive the business forward, does it align with the motivations of the new master? And you're exactly right. The IPO is the trickiest on that because shareholders want dividends. They want dividends and they want an increase in stock price.
Yep.
And that's all they care about. And that's a hard balance for a lot of businesses to negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for bringing that up. That's a huge point.
Sure.
And then, sometimes and frequently in what we call lifestyle businesses, sometimes a high net worth individual, typically a corporate executive, wants to get out of the corporate world. They want to quit answering to the shareholders and just run a business again. And so you'll have some high net worth operators that want to buy a job. And, sometimes that's a great external exit. And then, if you're thinking you've got even more runway and you want to really put yourself in a new plateau of growth or of operation before you exit your business, you want to grow the business first. There are some M&A transaction options that can help you out there too. There's what's called a recapitalization, where you sell a minority stake of a going concern to get more capital in to grow. You could bring on new business partners, similar to a recapitalization, usually a smaller scale. But when you bring in new business partners, hopefully they have some cash, but also some skills and expertise that will drive the business forward. And then silent partners or equity investors. This is usually an early stage play. You hear about venture capital, or as some of us in the biz like to call them, vulture capital. You're going to frequently give up a lot of your business when you're talking to equity investors. You're going to give up a lot of equity for the cash that you need, but they're also going to be pressuring you to give them liquidity in a certain time horizon. So sometimes it makes great sense. If you have a new product that you know is going to blow up and you have a buyer for your product once it's proven, getting an equity investor to help you launch the product in a big way, make that splash, and get the attention of the bigger player that you want to sell to, that could be a great play, but it's not always the play. So, I just really wanted to highlight all of the different options because there are a lot of options. And the earlier you start thinking about this and the earlier you start talking about it, the more time you give yourself, your team, your family to think through and explore these options so that you can know when you go out to market, these are the 2 or 3 that really make sense to us. And this is what we'd like our advisory team to pursue in the exit.
And with that, we want to leave you with 3 takeaways from this episode for you to ponder and take action to build out and to get whatever assistance you might need in order to implement these takeaways. And the first of those is identify your personal purpose. Stephen Covey, one of his principles in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People was begin with the end in mind. Well, I would say it differently. Begin with the best possible end in mind. And the best possible end for an owner of a lower middle market business is to have a sense of what their impact mission is in the world. What kind of positive impact do they want to have over and above their business, including their business, but not limited to their business? And what is the ideal calendar lifestyle and legacy that they want to enjoy? And what are their life balance commitments between now and when they're living their ideal lifestyle, calendar, and legacy? And so identify your personal purpose, because this is the secret to you giving yourself internal permission to have a life beyond your business so that you can do whatever version of exit is right matched for you. The second takeaway is identify family and employee needs and do that proactively so that you can build what needs to be built prior to initiating or starting enacting your succession plan or your exit plan or whatever version of exit you're going to be implementing. So start talking with your family and with your team and with your partners about what a plan for the business's next chapter beyond your ownership could look like that would address their concerns as well. So those are the first two episode takeaways. And Jason, you're going to offer the third takeaway.
I'm going to hit it right out of the park with this one. I really like that. Start talking with your family and team piece. You know, one of the things that really undermines a business during a transition like this is fear of the unknown and people knowing that something's up, but not knowing what that something is and making their own assumptions. And so I love that you bring up that talking about this to the team early and often, you know, so that there isn't that fear, there isn't that unknown. Everybody's just comfortable. Okay, this is the next step. We're going to start the transition plan. And that's where I get to the last takeaway is start building out that transition plan. And just like any other good plan that you ever implement in a business, you know, it starts with information gathering. Then you bring the team and the resources together. And that team finishes out the information gathering process and the planning process before any implementation starts to take place. And it's the same with this, you know your options for an exit, but also know who you need around you to help make that exit as powerful as possible. Like Dr. Gruder said, best possible outcome. And so, you know, those are the big takeaways that we wanted to have you get from this podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. On behalf of David and myself, we thank you for listening. It's been a lot of fun talking about this. We hope that you've enjoyed it as well. We look forward to reading your thoughts and comments in the comment section. We do take that very seriously. It will drive our conversations in the next subsequent podcast forward. So please feel free to do that. And we'd also love to have you click the subscribe button so that you're notified immediately every time we have a new podcast. And we look forward to talking to you again in future episodes.
That's all for this episode of Boosting Business Value. May your new learning result in the smoothest and most profitable exit strategy for your business. With the right knowledge and guidance, the sky's the limit to what you can do. Do not miss an episode by subscribing to the show. And if you want to learn where your business currently stands, we also have free key opportunity assessments. Find all of them at blueskyadvisors.net/podcast. Thank you for joining us. See you on the next one.